The Pacific Ocean is a sapphire void, a breathtaking expanse of beauty that doubles as the world's most silent graveyard. 16-year-old Mia is currently its youngest, most isolated resident. Only hours ago, the air was filled with the sound of steel drums and her family's laughter on the sun-drenched deck of a luxury cruise liner. Now, that world has vanished, replaced by the rhythmic, agonizing slap of salt water against the hull of a tiny, stranded fiberglass maintenance skiff. She is a mere speck of dust on the horizon, trapped in a vessel never meant for the open sea. The massive cruise ship is a ghost of the past, leaving Mia with nothing but a rusted toolbox, a half-empty gallon of water, and a silence so loud it makes her ears ring. She stares at the empty blue circle surrounding her, praying for a sail or any sign of human life. But the only thing that answers is the relentless burning sun. The crushing loneliness, however, is not the primary threat to her life. As the equatorial current drags her small craft toward the jagged neon-colored outskirts of a mysterious, uncharted island, the water turns into a deceptive, crystalline turquoise. The boat suddenly lurches, grinding its hull against a labyrinth of razor-sharp coral reefs that lie just inches beneath the surface, pinning her vessel between the open sea and the shore. Driven by a gnawing hunger that outweighs her fear, Mia commits a desperate, fatal mistake. She spots a cluster of giant oysters clinging to the coral submerged right next to the boat's edge. She leans over the side, her fingers trembling as they submerge into the warm water, reaching for the protein she needs to keep her heart beating for one more day. She thinks she is reaching for salvation, but she is reaching into a trap. Suddenly, the reef explodes in a violent blur of muscular, mottled flesh. A giant moray eel, its skin patterned with a sickening mosaic of yellow and black, lunges from a dark, jagged crevice with prehistoric speed. Its needle-like teeth sink deep into Mia's forearm, tearing through skin and muscle alike before retreating into the coral. In an instant, the predator's bite delivers a devastating neurotoxic payload directly into her bloodstream. A bolt of white-hot agony screams through her entire nervous system, paralyzing her arm almost instantly. Mia recoils into the center of the boat, gasping for air as her vision begins to blur and her limb starts to swell into a bruised, terrifying shade of purple. The attack lasted only seconds, but the damage is absolute. She is now anchored to a dying boat on a deadly reef, unable to even crawl to the dry sand just a few meters away. The island looms before her, but its interior is irrelevant. Mia's world has shrunk to the 3 meters of her fiberglass prison. She is a ticking clock, a dying girl whose life is being measured in the rapid, irregular beats of a poisoned heart. Every second the venom creeps closer to her chest, and her only hope is to find a way to neutralize the toxin using only the rusted tools at her feet before the tide rises to swallow her whole. Survival is no longer a choice for Mia. It is a brutal, agonizing race against a biological clock that is rapidly winding down. As the skiff remains wedged against the jagged coral, she collapses into the center of the boat, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. Before we dive deeper into Mia's desperate fight for life against the neurotoxin and the rising tide, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. We want to know who is watching this journey, so please leave a comment below telling us which city and country you are watching from right now. The venom is a liquid fire in her veins, turning her right arm into a heavy, useless weight that throbs with every erratic heartbeat. She looks at the rusted toolbox at her feet, knowing that somewhere among those cold metal tools, she must find a way to stop the poison from reaching her heart. The boat feels like a floating coffin, and the beautiful turquoise water surrounding her has become a barricade she cannot cross. Her eyes scan the horizon one last time, searching for any sign of the cruise ship or a passing vessel. But the glare of the sun on the water is blinding. Every movement is a battle against the lethargy beginning to cloud her mind. A terrifying side effect of the moray's neurotoxin taking hold. She drags her body toward the small patch of shade under the skiff's bench. Her yellow shirt now stained with the dark reality of her wound. She knows that if she loses consciousness now, the incoming tide will eventually lift the boat or wash over the gunwales, finishing what the predator started. There is no room for tears or self-pity, only the cold, hard instinct to perform a desperate act of field medicine before her lungs begin to fail. The silence of the ocean is heavy and judgmental, as if the waves are waiting for her to give up and slip into the deep. Mia reaches for the rusted wrench, her left hand shaking violently as she stares at the blackened skin of her forearm. Somewhere in her memory of biology class or survival shows, there must be a solution. But the pain is making it impossible to think clearly. Her fight to stay awake and stay alive begins now, and she realizes that the greatest enemy isn't the eel. It's the ticking of her own pulse. The metal of the wrench feels impossibly cold against Mia's palm, a stark contrast to the thumping heat radiating from her mangled forearm. Every breath is a conscious effort now, a mechanical lift of her ribs that feels heavier with each passing minute. She knows the neurotoxin is beginning to interfere with her diaphragm, the silent predator within her lungs trying to lull her into a final, permanent sleep. She stares at the red toolbox, her only source of salvation, and begins to dump the contents onto the fiberglass floor, searching for anything that can serve as a makeshift medical kit. A pair of rusted pliers, a flathead screwdriver, and a roll of heavy-duty duct tape clatter against the white ribs of the skiff's floor. Mia's eyes fixate on the tape. She remembers an old survival documentary about using pressure to slow the spread of neurotoxic venom. With trembling fingers, she begins to wrap the tape tightly above the bite, just below her elbow, creating a makeshift tourniquet to trap the poison in her limb. The pain is a blinding white flash behind her eyes, but she bites her lip until it bleeds, refusing to scream into the empty sky. The tide is noticeably higher now, the turquoise water beginning to spill over the low gunwales of the maintenance boat, mixing with the salt and grime at her feet. The boat shifts, groaning, as the coral teeth beneath the hull begin to lose their grip, threatening to drift the vessel further into the open lagoon. Mia realizes that if the boat floats free, she will lose the stability she needs to perform the next, more agonizing step of her survival. She wedges her feet against the side of the skiff, bracing her body against the rhythmic rocking of the Pacific. She reaches for the flathead screwdriver, her mind racing through the hazy memories of a first aid course she took back in high school. The venom has turned the bite marks into a dark, necrotic mess, and she knows she needs to drain the site if she has any hope of reducing the pressure. The sunlight glints off the metal tip of the tool, making it look like a jagged needle of fire. She knows what she has to do, but the primitive part of her brain screams at her to stop, to just lie down and let the lethargy take over. The silence of the island is broken only by the sound of the waves and the heavy, wet thud of her heart against her ribs. She looks at the white sand of the beach, so close that she could almost touch it if she could only stand. But her legs feel like leaden weights. There is no one coming to save her. The cruise ship is hundreds of miles away by now, a floating city that has forgotten its smallest citizen. Mia is the only doctor, the only pilot, and the only hope in this 3-meter world. With a sudden, violent burst of adrenaline, she presses the cold metal of the screwdriver against the edge of the swelling. The agony is beyond anything she has ever imagined. A searing heat that feels like she is being branded by the sun itself. She keeps her eyes locked on the horizon, focusing on a single point of blue to keep from blacking out as she works. The smell of salt and old metal fills her senses, a sensory anchor to a reality that is trying to slip away from her. Dark fluid begins to seep from the wound, a terrifying mixture of blood and the moray's clear, deadly payload. Mia gasps, her vision tunnel-narrowing until all she can see is the glint of the tool and the bruised purple of her own skin. She works with the mechanical precision of someone who has already accepted their own death, a strange calm settling over her as the initial shock fades. She is no longer just a teenager on vacation. She is a machine of pure survival, focused on the singular goal of breathing. The sun is beginning its slow descent, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and bruised gold. The long shadows of the island's mahogany trees stretch across the water, reaching out for the boat like dark wooden fingers. Mia knows that once the sun disappears, the temperature will drop, and the nocturnal predators of the reef will return to investigate the blood in the water. She has to finish this before the light fails, before she becomes just another part of the island's dark history. She reaches for the small gallon of water, taking a tiny calculated sip to wet her parched throat, knowing that vomiting would be a death sentence in her weakened state. The water tastes of plastic and heat, but it is the sweetest thing she has ever known, a liquid reminder of the life she is trying to claw back. Her arm is now completely numb from the elbow down, the tape tourniquet doing its job too well, but it gives her the momentary reprieve she needs to think. Mia leans her head against the cool fiberglass of the boat's side, staring at the rusted tools scattered around her like a bizarre altar. She has done the impossible. She has survived the first hour, but the true test is still to come. The island is watching, the tide is rising, and the venom is still waiting for its moment to strike. She closes her eyes for a single second, then snaps them open, refusing to let the darkness win. The transition from twilight to true darkness happens with terrifying speed on the open water. Mia feels the temperature drop as the tropical sun's warmth is replaced by a damp, salty chill that seeps into her bones. Her yellow shirt, once a beacon of colour, now looks like a faded shadow against the white fiberglass of the boat. She pulls her knees to her chest, trying to conserve body heat. But every movement sends a fresh wave of throbbing pain through her bound arm. The silver tape around her elbow glints under the rising moon, a metallic scar of her own making. The silence of the lagoon is no longer peaceful. It is heavy and filled with the rhythmic breathing of the ocean. Small bioluminescent organisms begin to glow in the wake of the ripples, tiny green sparks that dance around the boat's hull like ghostly fireflies. Mia watches them, her hazel eyes heavy with exhaustion, but she knows she cannot afford to sleep. In the dark, the predators of the reef become bolder, drawn by the scent of distress and the faint traces of the fluid she drained from her wound. A sudden heavy thud against the bottom of the boat makes Mia's heart leap into her throat. It isn't the soft grind of coral, but something muscular and alive. She freezes, her breath caught in her lungs as the skiff rocks gently from an external force. Looking over the gunwale into the dark turquoise depths, she sees a long, sleek shadow circling the vessel. It's not the moray eel this time. The reef sharks have arrived, their dorsal fins cutting through the water's surface like obsidian blades in the moonlight. The fear is a cold needle in her gut, sharper than the screwdriver she used earlier. She reaches for the yellow-handled tool, her fingers closing around it as a primitive defensive reflex. She knows the fiberglass hull is a thin barrier between her and the apex predators of the Pacific. The sharks aren't large, but they are persistent, their cold, black eyes reflecting nothing as they bump against the boat, testing the intruder in their territory. Mia realizes she is no longer the hunter trying to survive a wound. She is the prey. She remembers her father's voice telling her that sharks are attracted to vibration and panic. She forces herself to sit perfectly still, even as the boat tilts under the weight of a curious predator. Her vision is still slightly blurred from the neurotoxin, making the shadows in the water look like monsters from a nightmare. The moonlight casts long, distorted shadows across the boat's floor, turning the scattered rusted tools into jagged teeth. The silver tape on her arm feels tighter now, the swelling beneath it pushing against the adhesive. She can feel the rhythm of the ocean in her teeth, a deep, low-frequency hum that seems to vibrate through the boat's hull. To distract herself from the shadows circling below, she looks up at the stars, trying to find a familiar constellation. But the sky is foreign and vast, a reminder that she is a tiny speck of life in an indifferent universe. One shark, bolder than the rest, breaches the surface near the bow, its grey skin wet and shimmering like liquid lead. It stares at her for a heartbeat before slipping back into the deep with a powerful flick of its tail. Mia gasps, her left hand white-knuckled around the screwdriver. She isn't just fighting the venom anymore. She is fighting the urge to scream, to give up, to let the ocean take her. The rising tide finally gains enough strength to lift the boat off the coral shelf. With a sickening lurch, the skiff begins to drift away from the protection of the reef and toward the deep, dark center of the lagoon. Mia panics, knowing that in deeper water, she is even more vulnerable. She tries to reach for the small wooden oar, but her right arm is a dead weight. Refusing to obey the commands of her brain, she is drifting into the abyss, the shore of the island becoming a distant, unreachable memory. The shadows in the water follow her, patient and silent, waiting for the moment she slips from the boat or loses the strength to stay awake. Mia bites her lip again, the copper taste of blood grounding her in the present. She will not go quietly. She will not be a footnote in the island's history. The cold is her only companion now, a biting wind that begins to whip across the lagoon. She tucks her head between her knees, her brown braids falling over her shoulders, and whispers a promise to the dark. She will survive the night. She will see the sun rise over the white sand one more time. No matter what is waiting for her in the depths below, the first light of dawn is a thin, bruised line of violet on the horizon, slowly bleeding into a vibrant orange that illuminates the lagoon's treachery. As the tide recedes, the coral teeth of the reef begin to pierce the surface once more, and the maintenance skiff groans as it settles unevenly onto the jagged shelf. Mia realizes the boat is no longer a sanctuary. As the water leaves the reef, the boat tilts at a dangerous angle, threatening to capsize or crush her against the limestone. She knows that staying inside is a death trap, but the shadows of the sharks are still patrolling the deeper channels just meters away. With her left hand, she grips the side of the boat, her legs shaking as she forced them to take her weight for the first time in hours. The neurotoxin has left her right side heavy and sluggish, but the cold morning air acting as a wake-up call to her senses. She looks at the white sand of the island, now appearing like a golden paradise in the rising sun, and knows she has to make a run for it before the predators realize she is exposed. She carefully lowers her first foot into the shallow, crystalline water, the sharp coral stinging her soul through her salt-softened skin. The water is only calf-deep now, but every step is a calculated gamble. Mia moves with agonizing slowness, using the yellow screwdriver as a walking stick to probe the crevices for hidden stonefish or another moray. The silver tape on her arm is a bright reflected spark in the morning light, a metallic beacon that feels like it's pulling at her skin. She keeps her eyes locked on the shoreline, refusing to look back at the sleek grey shadows that still haunt the edges of the reef. waiting for a stumble. Her yellow t-shirt is a sharp contrast against the brilliant turquoise and purple of the living reef. She can feel the vibration of the ocean through the coral, a rhythmic pulse that matches the frantic beating of her heart. The sun is higher now, turning the lagoon into a field of liquid diamonds. But the heat is a double-edged sword, bringing back the dizziness she fought all night. She stumbles once, her hand splashing into a tide pool, and she freezes, waiting for the rush of a predator that doesn't come. The island's mahogany trees are close enough now that she can smell the damp earth and the scent of tropical blooms. It's a sensory lifeline, pulling her through the final, most difficult meters of the crossing. Her right arm is completely numb, a pale limb bound in silver that feels like it belongs to someone else. She focuses only on the next step, the next breath, and the solid ground that promises a temporary end to the nightmare. The sand is finally beneath her feet, the transition from sharp coral to soft, sun-warmed grains, bringing her to her knees in relief. Mia crawls the last few inches onto the dry shore, her body collapsing into the shade of a leaning palm tree. She is safe from the sharks, but the battle within her veins is far from over. She looks back at the white boat, now high and dry on the reef, looking like a discarded toy in the vastness of the Pacific. She reaches for her arm, the silver tape now covered in sand and salt. The swelling has stabilized, but the dark veins under her skin are a grim map of the poison's journey. Mia knows she cannot stay on the beach forever. She needs to find the emergency radio or a signal flare she saw in the distance before the cruise ship arrived. The island is her ally now, a solid fortress of green and gold that offers the resources the ocean denied her. She forces herself to sit up, leaning her back against the rough bark of the palm. The silence of the island is different from the silence of the sea. It is filled with the chirping of birds and the rustle of leaves, sounds of life that fuel her resolve. She looks at her hazel eyes and a small piece of mirror she salvaged from her pocket. They are bloodshot but clear, the gaze of someone who had stared into the abyss and refused to blink. Her fight has moved from the water to the land, but the stakes remain the same. She begins to gather dry coconut husks, her left hand working with a frantic, desperate energy to build a signal fire. Every movement is a victory over the lethargy, a rejection of the death the moray eel tried to gift her. She is Mia. She is 18, and she is going to go home. The smoke begins to rise, a thin grey ribbon against the perfect blue of the morning sky. It is a question asked of the horizon, a plea for rescue that carries all her remaining hope. As she watches the smoke drift toward the ocean, she realizes that she isn't the same girl who stepped off the cruise ship for a simple snorkeling trip. She is a survivor, forged in the salt and the dark, and the island is her kingdom. The tropical night returns with a vengeance, but Mia is no longer a silent victim. She feeds the signal fire with a frantic, desperate energy, dragging heavy palm fronds and dried mahogany branches toward the pit she dug in the white sand. Each movement is a battle against the leaden weight in her limbs, but she refuses to stop until the flames are roaring higher than the leaning trees. The fire becomes a living thing, a bright orange titan that screams her defiance into the dark indigo sky, sending thick plumes of grey smoke and brilliant sparks to dance among the stars. But the victory over the darkness is short-lived, as the neurotoxin finally breaches the final walls of her resolve. A violent, searing fever takes hold of her body, turning the cool ocean breeze into a furnace that makes her skin burn. Mia's hazel eyes begin to glaze over, the vibrant colors of the fire blurring into a chaotic swirl of light and shadow. She tries to stay upright, her left hand clutching the yellow screwdriver like a holy relic. But her strength evaporates like mist in the morning sun. As the fire rages beside her, Mia's world tilts violently. The sound of the waves becomes a distant, muffled hum, and the solid ground feels like it is dissolving beneath her knees. She collapses onto the sand, her pale face resting near the warmth of the embers, her body finally surrendering to the exhaustion. She lies unconscious under the vast Pacific sky, a small figure in a faded yellow t-shirt, while the massive pillar of smoke she created continues to ask the horizon the question she can no longer whisper. Hundreds of miles away, the search had never truly stopped. Her parents had spent the night in a state of living death, coordinating with a high-speed Coast Guard task force that refused to leave the archipelago. It was the smoke, a dark, jagged scar against the moonlit horizon, that caught the eye of a thermal imaging technician aboard a searching helicopter. The pilot banked the craft, the rhythmic thrum of the rotors cutting through the silence of the night as they converged on the signal that refused to go out. The rescue is a chaotic symphony of wind, light, and adrenaline. The helicopter hovers over the beach, its powerful searchlights turning the white sand into a blinding stage. Rescuers in flight suits descend on cables, their boots hitting the sand with a heavy thud as they sprint toward the still form near the fire. They find a girl who looks like she has been through a war, her pale skin crusted with salt and sand, her right arm bound in a silver tourniquet that tells the story of a night spent in hell. Mia is unconscious as they lift her onto the stretcher, her head lolling back to reveal a face etched with a maturity that no 18-year-old should possess. The flight back to the mainland is a blur of oxygen masks, emergency IV drips, and the urgent professional whispers of the medical team. They work with a grim intensity, recognizing the signs of the moray's deadly payload and the irreversible damage done by the poison's long journey through her veins. In the regional hospital, the battle moves from the sand to the sterile white halls of the surgical wing. The surgeons work for hours under the blinding glare of the operating lights, their scalpels moving with a precision that mirrors Mia's own struggle for life. But the toxin and the lack of blood flow have claimed their prize. To save her heart, to save the breath in her lungs, they have to make a devastating executive decision. They remove the limb to save the survivor. A brutal but necessary trade with the abyss. Weeks later, the hospital room is filled with the soft, golden light of a setting sun. Mia's parents are there, their faces worn by the miracle of her return, holding her left hand with a ferocity that speaks of a terror finally laid to rest. When Mia finally looks down at her right side, she sees the clean, white bandage where her arm used to be. There is a profound, heavy silence in the room as she processes the cost of her night in the lagoon. A physical silence where a part of her used to live. She doesn't cry. Instead, she looks at her reflection in the window, seeing the same fierce hazel eyes that stared down the sharks and the shadows. She is Mia. She is a survivor, and she is alive. The ocean took a part of her, a tithe of bone and skin for the life it tried to steal, but it couldn't touch the iron in her spirit. She realizes that the last line of survival wasn't the boat, the tape, or the fire. It was the unbreakable will that allowed her to build them. As the nurse adjusts her pillows, Mia looks out at the distant blue line of the Pacific on the horizon. She knows she will never be the same girl who stepped off that cruise ship, but she also knows she is something much stronger now. She is a woman who stared into the dark and forced it to blink. She grips her mother's hand, her pulse a steady, victorious drumbeat in the quiet room. She is going home, and for the first time in a long time, the world feels solid beneath her feet. The hospital window offers a panoramic view of the horizon, but Mia's gaze is focused inward, tracing the map of a battle that only she truly understands. As she looks at the clean white bandage where her right arm used to be, there is no bitterness, only a cold, hard sense of triumph. She thinks back to the dark water, the jagged reef, and the relentless shadows of the predators, and she smiles a survivor's smile. The ocean demanded a price for her life, a tithe of bone and skin, but it couldn't touch the iron core of her soul. She knows now that she didn't just survive, she conquered. She reflects on every line she had to cross. The line of the shore, the line of the tourniquet, the line of the signal fire, and finally, the line between life and death. She was a warrior in a yellow t-shirt, armed with nothing but a screwdriver and a will that refused to break. The loss of her limb is not a mark of defeat, but a trophy of a war she won against the very elements. Mia realizes that the true last line of survival was never the boat or the tools. It was her own heartbeat, a steady, defiant drumbeat that forced the darkness to retreat. As the sun sets, casting a golden glow over her hospital bed, Mia feels a profound power surging through her remaining hand. She is no longer the girl who stepped off the cruise ship. She is a titan forged in salt and blood. She has proven that even when the world takes everything, the spirit can remain whole. She is Mia. She is a survivor, and she has crossed every line to earn her tomorrow